So welcome to our 10th episode of Spiritual Shadowboxing. Today, we want to continue the conversation about racism in America. We might get into different aspects of it. We might get into allyship. We might get into some other nuances. But today we're honored to talk with Sacil Armstrong, who is an equity coach and a social justice facilitator. She leads anti-racism and social justice trainings, focusing on facts, not blame or shame, which is super important, and also integrating self-care, essentially helping people to increase their emotional capacity so they can handle hard conversations. This one may or may not be hard. It seems like we have a good thing going here already before we hit the record button today. But welcome, Sacil. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So would you like to just kind of give us a little bit more of a context for the work that you're doing, which is so beautiful in the world and so needed?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sure. As you said, I'm an equity coach and a social justice facilitator. So basically, I teach organizations and individuals what anti-racism is and isn't. And I integrate self-care so that people can increase their emotional capacity, because what happens a lot of times is people start talking about racism, and I'm glad you called it racism and not race, and they automatically get defensive. And once you get defensive, you can't listen because you're so busy defending yourself. And so in my courses, I spend a lot of time helping people recognize what they're feeling and how it's showing up for them so they can let it go. And again, we focus on facts. We focus on American history versus the American myth. And as we talk about that and let go of our emotions, what I found is I haven't had anybody in my class that leaves the same person that they were when they came in. People regularly break down and cry in my classes because I'm not blaming people for actions and decisions of their ancestors. I'm not shaming anybody for the color of their skin, and I'm not guilting anybody for what they don't know. I'm really just trying to teach people facts and help uplift them, help them forgive themselves so that they can choose different going forward. And all of my students so far have chosen to do different going forward. And they said that they feel a release, they feel, they cry because they say that not having that blame, shame, and guilt, having someone have empathy for their fear to learn just shifts the whole idea of them learning about anti-racism.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I love that. I just want to chime in here in the sense of what I see you doing in that safe space is letting people be with the intense, uncomfortable emotions that come up, ride that wave in a safe place, and then be more open and resourced and receptive to the knowledge and the information, which I think we've felt in some of our calls. The emotions rise up and it gets to be a lot, and to be held in the heaviness of it is really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah. If you can't sit with people where they are and allow them to experience what it is that they're feeling, they're never going to hear your message. Right. So you have to meet people's needs where they are before they can actually hear what you have to say. And that's something that I've known through like all of my work with grassroots activism and working at nonprofits and all of that. You can't share your message until people's basic needs are met. And when it comes to talking about racism, a basic need is alleviating somebody's fear, So
and I love how you said blame, shame, and guilt. Like when you talked about that, I love that because, removing that from, somebody's experience that it might be a block is a way of having that unity,
Yeah.
And it's beautiful that you allow a safe space for that.
Thank you.
You talked a little bit about some of the ways in which, like in your activism and in different nonprofits, like that this became clear to you, that this like nuance, but like pretty critical component was exactly that, was critical. Do you remember a moment or an event or something where it was sort of like that light bulb that went off, like, oh wow, if I change this, that the message could be more effective or will land with people? I'm just wondering, like, was there some moment or some event that like kind of really solidified that for you?
I don't know. I can't think of one specific moment. I can think of like a series of moments. But I used to be the executive director for Southeast Community Weed and Seed. That was a Department of Justice program to reduce violent crime in high crime, low income neighborhoods. And I ran the one in Southeast Newport News. And when I came on as the coordinator for this, the program had been up and running for 2 years and hadn't really made much progress. And so I came in and was supposed to, fix the things that were not going well and get this program running. And the first thing that I noticed was that the board was all talking past each other. When they would come in and sit down, the city employees were over here, the police department was here, and the residents were here. And they were all talking past each other. And the programs that they had put into place were not necessarily very effective because residents were showing up, but they were arguing. And so I probably spent the first 6 months just getting people to calm down and listen to each other. And most of that was, alleviating the fear on the part of the residents that the police were not going to listen, getting the city employees to understand that we were all supposed to be working together. It's not us versus them, and trying to get the police department to actually listen and understand that this isn't something we're doing for the residents, it's something that we're doing with the community. And I guess after that first 6 months of getting people to stop arguing and listen, and it was at the point where when they would sit down, I would have them count off 1, 2, 1, 2, and then have one number stand up and move down 3 empty seats to sit down next to people they didn't know. And so doing that, getting people to get out of their clique, get out of their mindset, meet new people, and kind of get rid of some of that fear of the other when they're all in the same room. That was kind of probably what started me on this path, because after that, with every program that we did, one of the first things that we worked on was, okay, what do these people need in order to hear what we have to say? Whether it was a school program trying to, increase attendance, it was like, okay, why are these kids not showing up? What do they need that would, give them the capacity to show up and be ready to learn? It's just like, that was part of everything that we did after that.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. I had a feeling that there was something. It just feels like there's in order to be effective at anything that we do in terms of facilitation or getting people on the same page, we have to understand what the why underneath is, right? Like the why or the fear or the, whatever the situation is. So yeah, it's really interesting. So thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm also loving, I think of empathy as being able to see the need that other people might not even know they need, which is kind of supporting the nervous system in that regard. And I'm noticing for me in the world of coaching, if someone's at a high number, they're not receptive, right? They're in their hindbrain, they're acting from the scared animal, they're not resourced in a way where they can be receptive. That can be couples, that can be employees. And to just even see that ingenuity on your part to go, wait, first we need people to calm the F down.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing's going to happen if I'm just trying to bulldoze through a meeting.
Right.
Frazzled people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, in the beginning, we even suspended Robert's rules so that we could get people together. It was like, okay, we're going to just suspend the rules for right now so that we can come together and actually talk and figure out how we can all get on the same page. And when I suggested that, there were probably 30 people on the board at that time. And when I suggested, hey, you guys, why don't we just suspend the rules? You should have seen, they were like, and then somebody was like, she's got a point because we're not being effective right now.
I have to say, I love the fact that you physically moved them.
Yeah.
I think that is brilliant. And,
thank you.
Part of spiritual shadow boxing is the to move energy through the body. We talk about that quite a bit. Kelly and I box, so we kind of move it, and then, first there's a shadow worker, so that's kind of how the work together. Maybe someday we'll go back to some boxing, but the point being is to move the energy through the body, because it's so much more attainable on a physical level first, right? And if you take away that barrier and have people move, because you're making a game of it, but the game is to understand that we're all the same, and that and there is commonality that we can strive for. you know.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that, you know, and I think,
Thank you.
moving
Thank you.
body, moving energy, that's great.
Actually, at the time, I'm highly intuitive, and I can see that kind of stuff now. And at the time, I was using my intuition without really thinking about it. I was just like, how can I get these people to stop having their little, click whisper conversations during the meeting?
Yeah.
And I was like, I can separate them. If they're sitting next to people they don't normally whisper to, people they normally whisper about, they'll be quiet and we can talk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's such a great pattern disruption to me, right? It's like such a simple thing to just
Mm-hmm.
say, we're not going to sit in these bubbles because the bubbles are the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it didn't take long after that. Once they learned that if they sat in their cliques, I was going to move them. Once they learned that, they stopped doing it. And people were like all over the place. And the first meeting I went to, they actually had a row of tables with chairs and a row of tables with chairs. And so the other thing that I did was move the tables in a circle, or a square, and everybody sat around together. So it's not like, the city and the police over here and the residents over here. We were all at the table together. And when it was like, when that was too much, one time I actually took the tables out and we just sat in a circle and talked.
Yeah, I'm hearing that as building community instead of this sort of adversarial stance of like us and them. It's like, no, it's us. So we actually have to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the sacred shape of the circle, bringing that.
Yes.
Up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does all of this, I mean, obviously you did that in the organization where you started, sort of formulating all of these different techniques and tactics and saw how effective it was.
Mm-hmm.
How does that translate as we sort of like fast forward to today and like what we're all, I don't want to say dealing with, because I think that has a negative connotation. I think what we're experiencing, the opportunity that we have right in this moment, how does that translate into allyship from your perspective?
I think it would translate into allyship. Hopefully, I'm hoping that the people who were a part of that program have a more open mind now to actually be able to listen when people are talking about what they're experiencing. The high crime, low income neighborhood that I was serving was predominantly Black. And the city employees who were assigned to the task force, and most of the police officers who were assigned to the Weed and Seed Project were white. And so
and did not live in that neighborhood, I'm assuming.
No, no, did not live in that neighborhood. Right. And so I'm hoping that the people who went through this process and got to know the people that they were there to serve, would be more open to hearing what people are experiencing and trusting that they're telling the truth and not just making excuses. That was one of the things that I found in the beginning, is that city employees and the police department were so quick to dismiss what the residents were saying. But as we leveled out the power dynamic and everybody figured out that, I wasn't going to bestow more power on somebody because of a title or because of, what department they worked in, that we were all on the same level playing field, then they started to give more weight to what the residents were saying, and the residents were the ones who were guiding the decisions. And that's when we started to see an impact in the things that we were doing. And so I'm hoping that the people who went through that actually have kept some of those lessons. And now as things are bubbling up and, people are starting to challenge racism more openly and they're out and they're protesting, my hope, because I don't live in Newport News anymore, but my hope is that the people who went through the Weed and Seed program would hold on to those lessons and listen to the people who actually have grievances and say, they wouldn't be doing this for no reason. And they're not just making excuses. Let's actually sit down and listen to hear what they have to say.
Yeah. I'm wondering too, I'm hearing two things that kind of created maybe a mindset shift there, which is first off, really creating community again. So that the people who don't live there, who are policing and serving, are meeting, like it's humanizing the whole process, right? Like that's a human being, that's a father, that's a mother, that's a child, it's a grandmother. So humanizing feels like across the board, part of what needs to happen even now. And then the second part, which it hurts my heart a little to say it, is that there wasn't legitimacy
Oh
Were,
yeah, that's
were
true.
the Black residents in what they were, their grievances? They didn't have legitimacy before that.
Hmm.
So
That's very true, and that's part of racism, to delegitimize what somebody else's experiences are and blow it off as you're just not working hard enough, or you're just not smart enough, or you just didn't get enough schooling, or you're lazy. That's part of racism, to delegitimize somebody else's experience and make the fact that you treat them as less than their own fault.
what is the impact, I want to know, for the Black community in not having just inherent legitimacy in our country?
I'm
That's a
laughing
big
because
question.
that's
Yeah.
such a huge question, and that's kind of what we're grappling with right now. I mean, if you look at the just like focusing on police violence, like look at the Breonna Taylor case right now. The police went in with a no-knock warrant and killed her. Whether they killed her intentionally or not, they killed her. And look how hard people are having to struggle to get justice for her. I mean, it was obvious that the attorney general was not being 100% truthful when he did his
Investigation.
yeah. And then for one of the jurors from the grand jury to say, I want the transcripts released because he's not telling the truth, and then to have that released, and it's obvious he didn't even ask for the cops to be held accountable. I mean, this is a personification of what we were just talking about not feeling legitimized.
Right.
I mean, they're basically saying her life didn't matter.
And somehow, it's like that. This is the reform that needs to happen within the police force itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's just like, my brother's a police officer, so I have to, when I go home and I see my family, I hear his stories, I hear his experiences, and my brother's a good cop. I mean, and but the problem is, and when we try to have conversations, which is not often very easy to have a conversation with him,
right?
To this, I tell him that what does it say on your police car? Protect and serve.
Mm-hmm.
When did the police stop protecting and serving?
Mm-hmm.
And go back to the reform of that, going back to the form that,
Well, the question is also, who are they protecting?
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. They're protecting themselves right now during what's going on.
They're protecting themselves and people who look like them, for the most part.
For the most part.
Well, I would say they're protecting themselves and they're protecting white people, because there are plenty of Black cops out there.
That's why I said for the most part.
Right. There are plenty of Black cops out there who have the same mindset. They will tase a Black person before they tase a white person, because even as a Black cop, you would feel the repercussions of treating a white person the way we see cops treating Black people on TV.
Yeah. So true.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just, when, this is what needs to change, is their training and understanding that, to serve is to serve all, right?
Mm-hmm.
To protect is to protect all. And going back to like our little meditation that we did, understanding that we are a human race, and demystifying, the fact that, this us and them, we have to get away from this us and this them. Any form of separatism is going to bring us down a timeline that we don't want to go. And we've been down that timeline forever.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I don't know that the police as it is established in the United States can be retrained. I honestly think it needs to be abolished and restructured. It needs to be redone, because it was created, our police departments were created when they established slave catchers. The police department was created to catch and police Black bodies. They were created to, imprison us and treat us as less than. We were property, and the police were created to go out and get us and bring us back to our white masters. And if that is your foundation, how do you retrain that to be something else? I don't think you can. I think we need to just re-envision what policing is supposed to be. And when people say, that hashtag defund the police, I'm all for it. It doesn't mean that we don't need policing. It means that we don't need to police the way we do. They have too much power. They are too militarized. They have too many weapons that they don't need. Why does a rural community need a tank and bazookas to police their community? I think that if we spent more money on prevention and providing people's needs, then we wouldn't need so much intervention and violence later on.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Just look at England. Their police officers don't have guns.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why like have a military police like we do? It's just out of hand.
Right. In Japan, they don't have guns either. I was reading how when they come up against somebody who's violent, they have like these futons and they like roll them up like a burrito in the futon and take them to the police station to handle, whatever it is they need to handle. They don't shoot people. They roll them up in a futon. I thought that was crazy. But, it's nonviolent and it works.
Yeah, and I'm hearing too, I think the history, right? Because some of us can hear defund the police and be like, whoa, we need something, like, let's not throw everything away. And I'm hearing that the slave patrol history behind it is really what is creating an imprint. I'm going to call it an imprint spiritually on the way it's being done. I'm curious about the way that they're trying to establish community safety, where it's like, yes, we're getting a call, but this could actually be someone off their meds. So let's send, a therapist along with the cop. Let's let the therapist go check it out first, with always having that backup, but not sending someone trained to handle criminals to everything that might not be criminal.
Right. We talked about this one other time, maybe on one of the other shows, about having a model where you've got multiple different practitioners, different modalities, different specialists that are going to different types of calls. So based on the type of call it is, that's the team that you send in, right? And sometimes it's not anyone related to anything criminal.
Right.
I agree. And I actually brought that whole subject to my brother as a cop. Yeah. And he just thought it was the most ridiculous thing he ever heard.
Well, but here's the reality of that.
Because like he said, it needs to be torn down and rebuild because of that mentality. Yeah, but Kelly, what were you going to say?
What I was going to say was, like, the reality is he can think it's ridiculous because it's nothing that's ever been done before. So it seems like, oh, that would never work, right?
And
because
we're focused. Yeah, would never go. He said a therapist would never go in that kind of dangerous situation.
Well, a therapist would never go in that situation as the structure stands today.
Exactly.
Right. But the reality is that all of these police officers in the scenario we have today are essentially having to do the job of about 17 different types of people.
Yes.
Exactly. Therapists, conflict resolution, criminal, like you name it, anything that could happen in any given situation, they're having to play the part. And
they're not trained for it.
They're not trained for that. They're trained just for the militaristic, well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe not just the militaristic component of it, but certainly not enough on the empathy and the...
They're not trained to de-escalate. They're
de-escalation.
Yeah.
Right.
And England is, with their police, with their patrolmen, have no guns. And when there is a situation that escalates, that they feel like there is a high risk or danger, they have a division that has the weapons that they can, if needed. And it's like works in England. I mean, England's a small country, obviously, but I don't understand why components of how it works there, or even with Japan with the futons, we could bring it all in, And,
I like the way they talk about it. They say they police by consent, which means that the way they police has to be approved by the people. It has to be approved by the public. And so that's why they don't go around, shooting people and beating people up. It's because they want people on their side. They don't want to have an adversarial relationship with the public.
Yeah.
What do you think? I'm just curious about this. It kind of just came to the top of my mind now. But what do you think about especially in places where there have been more protests. The police forces in those, or the police departments in those particular areas, essentially being like the aggressor
They're
in a lot of,
instigators.
they're
Yeah.
instigating, right?
Mhm.
Like, why do you think that that's happening right now? Is it because there's this like shining this light on what they've always been, and so they're sort of acting out because of it?
Yeah, I don't think this is anything new for them. I think the thing that's new is that everybody's getting it on cell phones and is showing it on social media. Because if you notice, the mainstream media isn't covering this.
Right.
The mainstream media isn't
Correct.
covering that 93% of the protests since George Floyd's murder have been nonviolent.
Right.
They're not covering that. They're not talking about that the police departments are the ones that are instigating the violence, that is peaceful until the cops show up.
Right.
They're not showing the videos that show people standing peacefully on a corner, and then cops come through with batons and start beating everyone. If the mainstream media was showing that, things would be changing right now, because this is just what happens. It's just that people are now seeing it, people who haven't seen it before, people who don't live in these Black and brown communities, people who are in communities that have not protested before and, thought that they would stand up on the side of right and that things would just change. They're now seeing what other communities have known for centuries.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the police departments, for the most part, I think, are so used to just using violence and bullying to get their way, because they're always given the benefit of the doubt, that they're like, what do you mean we can't do this anymore? And you see that in the police departments where people are just quitting, saying, oh, you want to hold me accountable because somebody died? Well, then we're all going to quit in a mass protest, and you guys police yourselves. I mean, who does that?
It's very infantile.
Let them quit. Let them quit. Let them quit.
I'm also wondering too, I mean, this is just a gap I look at as a coach, is like, where is all this anger coming from? Like the root of, right, you walk by peaceful people and you beat them with batons. Like, what is happening? Like, I'm missing that piece of.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of maybe the why underneath my question was sort of that. Because I don't understand it. I get that this is normal. I mean, I guess that's what I'm waking up to, that this has been going on forever, and I just never saw it because I didn't see it on TV, and I wasn't in neighborhoods where I saw this on a daily basis. So that's like the sort of awakening moment for me. But yeah, like why? That's the same question that you had, Fereshta. I don't understand.
Well, I have a theory, but just keep in mind that this is just my personal opinion. having worked for a police department and a sheriff's office before, when I was doing this community activism, what I saw a lot was that the people who were applying for the police department oftentimes had like a Napoleon complex, and they oftentimes had grievances before they even got on the police force, and like the power that they had and the authority that they had once they put on the uniform and the badge, and they were bullies. I mean, not every cop is that, of course. There are a lot of cops who join the force because they want to do some good and then find out that they really can't change the organization from within. But there were way too many who were already domestic violence abusers, who were, who talked about being able to get revenge on people that had, hurt them in the past, who talked about liking the fact that, they could tell people what to do, and, that people were afraid of them. There were way too many cops that were like that.
Could you potentially, I know this is kind of like a edgy thing here, but could you potentially apply a percentage of how many in just we'll use your small group that we're talking about, what is the percentage of applicants that you believe or that you observed were on that side of it, where it was like a bullying, revengeful, power hungry reasoning why they were joining the force, versus the percentage that were like, I genuinely want to help people and that's why I'm doing this?
Okay, keep in mind, this is just based on my experience.
That's all I'm
asking. But with the ones with the cops that I worked with Weed and Seed for 5 years, with the cops that I worked with, I would say it was 90% bullies.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say 80-20 or 90-10, so that does
Yeah.
not surprise me.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, to the point where the ones that I knew that were there to do the job in a peaceful way, that were there to actually help people, that were not there to either just move up the ranks because they wanted to be, you know, in charge, or who were not there just to bully people, I could probably count on one hand. I mean, there's 3 specific people that I could name that I'm like, I know their heart was in the right place. They were good people. I saw them de-escalate. I saw them hold people accountable when they were, you know, going off the rails. And then there are others that I'm like, I know that you were only there because you needed a way to channel your rage that was socially acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I was feeling, was like how many people in power are just looking for a place to channel their rage, and how much is that a part of the work that needs to be done.
And also, I think the idea of a uniform too. I mean, there was a study done, I'm sure you guys know, years and years ago, about prison guards. Did you guys remember that study? And how as people, when they put that suit on, and their experiences as they spent more time in that kind of power role, it kind of, it almost like kind of, it changed them. And I think that, if I remember correctly, do you remember this, that they had what's the test was, like, they had this thing that they said that you could electrocute somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I remember this.
No, and,
Do you know what this is, Fereshta?
do you remember the study?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Talk about it
that.
a little bit.
So, so they wanted to do a study on like how a uniform and how that lust for power can change the human psyche. Again, because it's forming a separation, a veil of separation. They would tell these people that, okay, they're plugged in. 1 is easy, 5 is okay, gonna hurt a little, 7, 8, it's really hurting that person.
For electroshock therapy.
Yeah, just for electric shock. It was like an experiment. And they found, like, do you remember the results? Like, near the end, the longer the person wore the uniform, they went up to the 7, like right away. They had no problem, zapping those people. People that just started wearing the uniform, they were a little bit more kind of, I don't really want to hurt that person. But it just talks about the psychological impact of a uniform. So, so that's another thing we have to look at, what they wear, and how it's putting on the badge. Maybe it's the badge or the uniform. It makes them feel separate and above, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think people that have that yearning for power, like you said, that 90%.
Well, I want to
platform.
Yeah, I want to qualify that 90%, because I don't mean that 90% of the people coming in are already like ready to beat people down. Yeah. But the 90% of the people that I worked with. So I don't know if they all came in looking for that, or if they came in thinking they were going to do good and weren't able to maintain that. They just got caught up in
both.
Yeah, but that's a good distinction. And the only thing that I have that's even related to that from personal experiences, I have several, uncles, cousins, etc., that are police officers. The youngest of them, my cousin, started out wanting to be a police officer because his dad was a police officer, and I believe that he wanted to help people. He's been on the force for several years now and is part of the SWAT team. I have noticed a difference in his personality, having been on the force, and now with an even ratcheted up sense of power on a SWAT team. I've noticed a difference in him.
Wow.
He's not the same person that he was when he first joined the police department.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm also hearing, that superiority complex, the bullying complex, those things are often in like an inverted inferiority complex. So there's just like a lot to unpack there. And I'm also wondering too, why aren't cops living in the communities they serve? Like that feels
that
like
is huge.
That is huge. That's huge. That goes back to protect and serve. They were living in the community. Like, wasn't it Camden that just recently, or maybe a couple of years ago, Camden, New Jersey, that fired everybody in their police force? I talked about this last time, because I think it's an amazing example of what can do on a national level. Fired everybody, and then everybody had to they had to rehire. If you were on the force for 20 years, didn't matter. You had to put the application in, and you had to be rehired. So they cleaned out the whole entire police force. And then the ones that they came back and allowed to be police officers, they had to go into the communities and knock on the door of everybody's house and introduce themselves. Again,
that makes a huge difference.
And I guess, you know, I'm going to look on the stats on when that happened, but supposedly it's just turned it around when it comes to
it was a few years ago
when they did that.
yeah. Like I want to say 3 to 5 years ago.
I mean,
not
I don't
exactly
understand
sure.
why when they say about defunding the police, they can't go to that as an example of what can be done.
Yeah.
You know, because it is about living in the community. I think it's a great idea. I think they should live in the community, you know, that they protect and serve. And another thing,
and people used to walk, the cops used to walk the beat, you know, they used to get out and walk.
And it'd be like, hi, and say everybody, you know. Like,
and now they stay in their cars and they just like cruise by and talk to people over the loudspeaker.
Yeah. And I do think that in some cops, there has to be a form of post-traumatic stress disorder.
A lot of cops have PTSD.
I think that we can't overlook that, you know.
No.
And how that affects their behavior.
And the thing is, for most of them, getting mental health services is optional. I mean, unless they shoot someone, everything else that happens that's traumatic, you have the option of using the employee assistance program, but you don't have to.
Right. And you're talking about a very masculine energy, you know, situation. And in this case, you know, there is a gender association with that for the most part.
Yeah.
You're talking about the stigma of mental health. You're talking about what they're going to experience on the other side should they choose to go the route of enlisting to get help that they know that they need, but, you know, won't because of that.
Yeah. And I saw that as I worked in the police department too, because there were several guys that I know cops who committed suicide. There were some that were obviously in distress, and their fellow officers that would want to tell them that they could get help whispered about it. They didn't just talk about it. I mean, I happened to be in the room with these two guys, and one guy had obviously experienced something traumatic, and the other cop that was with him took down the EAP flyer off the wall and was like, you can always do this, and kind of shoved it down the table at him. And I'm like looking out the corner of my eye and I'm like, go help that man. In my head, I'm like, go help that man and tell him he's not by himself and tell him he needs to get the help. But he was like, you can always do this, you know, shoving the flyer down. And I was just like, oh my God, he's already stigmatizing that by, I'm not going to say it out loud, and I'm not going to walk over and hand it to you and look in your eye.
Right.
That's
mandatory.
They should have therapy mandatory for all the police, because just if you think about if we put ourselves in their place, every time you put the uniform on and the badge, you could die. You could die in your job. How many jobs you go out and there's a possibility that you could get?
I'm going to challenge that.
Okay.
Policing is not one of the most dangerous jobs in America. It's really not. If you look up the most dangerous jobs, the ones that you could die, you're more likely to die as a logger. You know, I can't even remember what else, but policing is not, I don't think policing is even in the top 10.
Maybe let me rephrase it a little bit. Let me rephrase it. A log and all that, yes, it could be more dangerous statistically, but those are all.
You mean the
accidents.
perceived,
Yes.
the self-perception?
Yes, I was just
I could die. Okay.
Yeah, let me rephrase that, because you're right. But those are all accidents that can happen at work. You know, I'm a photographer. I could fall off of the ladder. You know, but as choosing being a police, yes, there's a perceive. You like you
I'll agree about the perception.
Okay. I should rephrase it. Thank you, Kelly. Kelly.
So go ahead.
Oh, I'm done.
Oh, okay.
You're right. You know, it is perceived. You know,
you're saying that you believe that part of the restructuring. So we could call it defunding the police, but what we really mean is like restructuring the entire thing from the ground up. And part of that, your belief is that they should have mental health support.
Yes.
On a weekly basis, on what is your proposal? You, Kelly.
Me. Oh, yeah.
to mitigate.
Who are you talking to? Me? Okay, I can tell you what I feel.
To mitigate the self-perception of putting that uniform on. Not mitigate, but to help it.
I would say once a month minimum. I think once a month there should be a check-in,
regardless of whether they have any experience.
No, if you're a police officer, this is part of your job. Once a month checkup, check in. How you doing? How you feeling? And then I think that anybody that's had like an experience that could cause,
then they get extra support.
Yeah, that's how I feel. What do you guys think?
I think that makes sense.
I mean, think about it. Therapists themselves are mandated to have their own therapist.
Yeah, I know.
Mhm.
Yet we're going to
Yeah.
have police officers not have to have
care.
that as, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so put that on the list of things we need to change. And, and
Yeah.
I do think defund the police is the stupidest name. I'm sorry. I'm going to speak my mind. I think it's a stupid name. I think that it's bad PR. I think people hear it and they're like, what do you mean? We're going to have
Well,
to.
it's divisive.
And that caused separation, which is fair.
So
Anything that, something we need to rename it, relabel it, make it so people can be on board with it, because we all want this. Because what is next? That's what what's next? How can we create the change that we all want to see?
how do you feel about that, Sacil, in terms of like the name of like defunding the police or defund the police?
I think, what are you going to say that would fit a hashtag?
We don't want
a hashtag for a second. Forget
No,
about a hashtag.
We don't need a hashtag. That's no.
I hear what you're
and
saying.
I will say this. Having the privilege of saying, I don't like the way you say this, so I don't want to hear what you have to say, is white supremacy. That's privilege speaking. Because when
But I don't really agree with you on that, because I'm not talking about privilege. I'm talking about language.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but you're
Language.
policing the language of the people who are trying to make the change.
But when you say defund, people that don't understand thinks we want to tear it down and rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah.
But for somebody that says defund and does not pay attention, or gets their news from Fox News, or does not understand, you're gonna come and get you. Your language is so important, and how you express yourself.
I hear what you're saying, and
that's
what it sounds like to me is Colin Kaepernick taking a knee was challenging the anthem and disrespectful to the anthem. So why can't he protest a different way? That's what I hear when I hear you say that. I don't like the way you protest. I don't like the way you said that, and people are not going to hear you. So why don't you change the way you protest? That's what I hear when I hear you say, I don't like defund the police. I understand why you say it, but the people who aren't going to hear you are not going to hear you regardless. Colin Kaepernick took a knee, and people were still being killed. And now people are out in the street protesting, and they're saying, we don't like the way you protest. The police are out there causing violence, and they're blaming the protesters and saying, you need to be more peaceful. Don't loot. Well, the people who are out protesting are not the looters, but they're getting blamed. Regardless of what we say, regardless of how we say it, somebody's not going to like it, and the people who don't want to hear it are never going to hear it. So we need to just say what we say.
Okay, I understand you, and I as Kelly says, and what did you say? That I let that in.
Okay.
Well, let me
let that in, and
I'm not saying you're wrong.
No, I'm not saying you're right.
Okay.
I want to see the change happen, and and I'm just I'm trying to how it can be a smoother transition if possible.
I want to try to translate Kelly for a second.
Okay.
Because I see and hear both of your sides and really understand both of them. And I think, Kelly, you're coming from a good place, like underneath it all. It's all coming from a good place. I think you're,
and I believe that. I trust that.
Totally. I see that. But I think your real question is, does the language that's being used make the possibility or the feasibility of restructuring the police department in America, like all police departments in America, does it make it less feasible because we're using this particular word? Would more people be on board with it if we were to change the verbiage? Is that what your real question is?
Yeah, that was what I said. Right.
And that's what I heard. I mean, I heard that part, but then I go back to Colin Kaepernick took a knee.
Right.
How nonviolent can you get to protest?
Right.
And the country was up in arms.
Right.
And they wanted him to do it differently. And now look where we are. And no matter what the Black Lives Matter movement does, no matter what Black and brown people do to say, stop killing us, whatever we do, there's always going to be some faction that says, don't do it that way.
Well, look at, right, that's a perfect example, Sacil, is that like even Black Lives Matter as a movement, there are so many people who were resistant, and they would say, well, if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, then I'm going to say Blue Lives Matter. And if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, I'm going to say all lives matter, right? And there was so much resistance about this. At the end of the day, I hear exactly what you're saying. It doesn't matter. Like, just pick one and go with it.
That's where I am. Pick a slogan and go with it, because nobody's ever going to be satisfied. And the people who don't want to hear you, I'm not going to hear you regardless. They're going to keep moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
Well, I'll own my own journey. When I heard that, I did sense alarm. Like, wait a minute, are we just going to throw away our whole ability to have protection of some kind in the country? And I understand as an activist, like, that's a hashtag that will get curiosity. Because I heard it and I was like, whoa, okay, I need to look into that. That's freaking me out a little. And then understood, like, that was a way to claim attention and to make a point, like you said. It's tricky though, because I can feel the charge around, like, being told how to do protest. And I'm curious about that. Yeah, I'm feeling curious for the Black community being told, like, that's not how you can do it.
And that was not my intention by saying that.
I didn't think it was. I was just telling you that that's what I felt. I knew that your intention was trying to get more people on board. I mean, I heard that from you and I felt that from your heart. but what I heard at the same time was, you're telling me how to protest. You're telling me that what I'm doing is not palatable to you.
Right. And I'm sorry if anything came across like that,
No. Like I said, I knew your heart was in the right place, and I'm not directing any of this at you, but this is just directed at, this is how things go. If you look at history, every time, even when Dr. Martin Luther King started protesting, they were like, not like that, even though it's nonviolent. And then, you go to sit in at the Woolworths and not like that. So we're going to, dump food on your head and all that kind of, no matter what people do, if you're the oppressed and you start challenging the oppressor, the first thing they're going to say is, oh, you have freedom of speech, but not like that, not in a way that makes me uncomfortable, not in a way that makes me have to do research or think or change the way you do it, in a way that makes me comfortable. And when they do it in a way that makes you comfortable, then you don't have to participate, you can ignore it.
No, that's a very good point, actually. And to make people just uncomfortable, I think, is a very good point. Going back to Fereshta's point, I think that's very true. I just, my whole point is about unity and bringing people together. And I know how important language is, and I'm empathic, and I totally understand and feel this conversation and where you're coming from. I'm also an Aries, and I want to.
Okay, I felt that too.
And I want to see action, baby.
And she brings spirituality into it now.
Boxing.
Well, I want to say thank you for hearing me out on that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, this is, right there, that's a great model of like a potentially uncomfortable, difficult conversation, right? Like, you have your viewpoint, I may not understand it, she's got a viewpoint. Like, as long as we're both, and all of us are just open to hearing it, like, what is your experience? Why am I saying this? Why do you have resistance? That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's it. And I actually want to call this episode, like, why defund the police is the right slogan. Like, you have literally,
okay.
That's what I'm going to call the episode, because that's the thing. That's what we've got to talk about.
No, and I'm on board for that. Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Change my tune.
Well, does anyone have anything that they want to add in before we wrap up today? This has been a really, really amazing episode.
Really fun.
It really has.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you guys. This was great.
Yeah, it was. And thank you so much for coming in and being open and loving. And
well, thank you for creating that open, loving space for me to show up. So, yeah.
I will add your website to the show notes. But for anyone who's not looking at the show notes, you can find more about Sacil at sacilarmstrong.com, and it's SACIL Armstrong.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.